Chapter 21, The New Rule, 1977. The businesses of the NF were expanding every day, and with expansion came new rules designed to enhance our growth potential. A note was sent to all NF officers one Sunday morning to let everyone know to alert their families that the following Sunday there wouldn't be any visits with any members of the NF. No questions asked. Families were told that they shouldn't come and no reasons were given. That following Sunday, all the NF officers gathered on the yard for a meeting. We were assembled in a circle with NF soldiers situated in an outer perimeter surrounding the officers. This was to keep out any other NF members as well as potential intruders. This was obviously an important meeting. How important, I'd soon find out. The effect that this meeting had on the organization was so impactful, so resolute, that it changed the entire fate of the NF in a single instant. It also changed the attitudes of many within the NF, some in a negative way. The new rule was that to take effect immediately was that from this point forward, there would be no more heroin used by any member of the NF, with an emphasis placed on the word no. To impress the membership of the seriousness of the rule, the edict proclaimed that anyone caught using heroin from now on was subject to a death sentence. This was automatic death without arbitration. This new rule compared to the famous shot heard around the world that signaled the start of World War I. I asked DR why there was to be such a harsh penalty for using hard drugs when everybody was using them. He explained that it was just for that reason. Everybody, and most everybody in the organization, was using heroin or hard drugs, and it was bringing negative attention to the NF. These same people were using drugs and killing other people and committing crime behind drugs and drug use, and these actions weren't condoned by or conducive to the betterment of the organization. The new rule caused some animosity in the ranks. Needless to say, the hit squad was working overtime to effect compliance with those who didn't take heart to it. The membership declined a little at first, but rebounded again as members finally saw the end result of ill ways, or put another way, saw the light of changing bad habits. With the change came increased profits and greater discipline. Within a few days, 6 members asked to be locked up because of this new rule. After the meeting, I returned to my regiment and informed them of the new rules, which elicited the same concerns which had been raised earlier. After being in the organization for several years, I was aware of most of the unforeseen problems and could pretty much nip them in the bud. But this was going to take it to a whole different level. I went on to explain that I didn't agree with this new rule either, but that I would follow it and sure as hell enforce it in the interest of the NF, even if it meant the punishment of death if someone was caught using heroin. 2 weeks later, things took a bad turn for the Nuestra Familia. We had lost 6 members who had locked it up, losing face and going into protective custody. Goddamn, them motherfuckers wanted to use dope bad as fuck. Then word leaked out that several members were under investigation for suspicion of using heroin, and it was known they were dirty. They knew what the penalty was and decided they didn't want to face the music. Then somebody got really stupid and killed a kid named Blanco from Stockton in a drug deal gone bad. His death never should have happened. Because of it, shortly afterward, the SSU and the FBI started arresting members and putting pressure on the organization, looking for Blanco's killer or killers. With this kind of pressure put on some of the high-ranking NF members, the unbelievable started to happen. Mousy broke down under threats, then Jesse James, then Art V. They all started talking and giving the feds information. Oh, they all received immunity and were put under the Federal Witness Protection Program, but they were also put on the NF's most wanted list. The repercussions and fallout continued for the NF as the SSU and FBI started raiding our business dealings. This caused the circumstances surrounding the organization to spiral even further downward. Because we were losing revenue at each shop, card room, hotel, and most of all other money-making ventures, they started closing down even before the feds busted them. This was a disaster and I was taking it personally. Some of my closest buddies who I looked up to were now outcasts and traitors. I felt sick in my heart. The organization was falling apart. A week later, a general council meeting was called and took place on the bleachers on the yard. This was not going to be a nice meeting. All the lieutenants from all the regiments were in attendance and standing in a straight line, shoulder to shoulder, facing me on the bleachers perimeter. 10 feet in all directions was secured by NF soldiers to keep the meeting private. I ran down the latest events that had taken place over the past couple weeks about the Blanco kid getting killed, which triggered the Fed investigation. Then I lost my cool. I uncharacteristically lashed out at the members, expressing my disappointment of those who had broken the circle of trust in the Nuestra Familia. I ranted and raved until I started to go hoarse. I was so out of control that one of my lieutenants approached and took me by the arm, pulling me aside and out of earshot of the other members. He gave me a stern warning, telling me to never talk to them like that. I was enraged at the time, but I also knew he was right. I told him it wasn't personal. Did I feel better afterward? Not really. Before the day was over, I was summoned by Babo and DR. I pretty much knew what they wanted and I was right. I was reprimanded for losing my cool. I let them know that I was just voicing my opinion. They told me to tone down my opinions, especially to those members who were still loyal to the NF. I finally simmered down and thought to myself that Babo and DR were right. The next day, as if we didn't go through enough, word came down that Larry was busted for killing the guy by hanging him in the county jail. He was on his way back to prison with a life sentence. I asked myself, is this all worth it? As the feds were dropping their hammer on the Nuestra Familia organization, members knew charges were imminent due to the new rules. The feds were coming at us with a new tool of their own called the RICO Act, which has to do with organized crime. The NF had grown so large that the organization was split into two groups. The main group was called the Inner Circle, with the secondary group being called the Outer Ring. These were people of an outside regiment who were all NF sympathizers. This new regiment was commanded by Bo, who had a captain's rank. Bo made rank after all these years, and I knew he would be a good leader. The Outer Ring would later be known as the Northerners. The reason for that Outer Ring was to keep the two groups separated, thus throwing off the feds from the Inner Circle. It was sort of a decoy to keep the pressure away from the higher ranks of the NF. Even though Bo was captain, he answered to the general of the first captain of the Inner Circle. Anyone wanting to join the NF from that outer ring had to prove himself by committing an illegal act or the sort acceptable to the NF. That act could be selling drugs, stealing cars, pimping, a prostitution service, or in some cases killing an enemy. Only then would a prospective member be considered by the general or the first captain for approval. In 1982, the federal government indicted about 50 members of the NF under the Federal RICO Act. One of the assignments of the lieutenants in charge of the regiment is to turn in a monthly report as to how his regiment is doing in regards to making money for the organization, as well as individual evaluations of members in the regiment. This is a must-do task to keep the brass of the NF informed of the progress and logistics of each regiment. Little Richie from San Jose and G-Wing came under scrutiny when he failed to do this task. He had been in the position of lieutenant for just a few months and was doing what he could, but a lack of leadership skills was weighing on his shoulders. A motorcycle gang known as the Vagos was controlling all the gambling and drugs in G-Wing. I was sent there because Little Richie had lost control of his regiment. When I arrived, I told Little Richie that I was there to replace him. He had expected this to happen and didn't give me any resistance during the transition. He was demoted to wing commander, making him my right-hand man. He knew all that was going on in G-Wing, and until I was brought up to speed about everything in the regiment, I needed him there.